Hello and welcome to another video from Flash Jazz Cat. Now, as you can see on the desk here we have an Atari 1200XL motherboard, and this one, well, it had quite a journey to the UK. It's come from the United States for a series of upgrades which I'll get into in a minute. How's that PCB coming along? Been working on that for quite some time? Well, if you're having trouble getting your project off the ground, why not visit PCBWay.com today? They have over 10 years of experience in PCB prototyping and assembly. They also offer CNC and 3D printing services and can even produce a flexible PCB. They're even running a project design contest with $6,000 worth of prizes currently up for grabs. So if you're looking for inspiration to get your project off the ground, why not pop down to PCBWay today? But this one was stuck in customs for an incredible 28 days after it arrived in the UK. The first inkling we got of this was the tracking status, and then a couple of days later I received a letter from Parcel Force, who were the inbound shipper, on paper asking for more information so they could calculate what taxes and fees were applicable to this import. Of course, I wasn't importing anything at all. I was simply going to work on this machine and then send it back to the client. And of course, as usual, I directed the client to clearly mark the box as parts for repair. The client helpfully emailed Parcel Force, as did I, provided all the information I could, including my EORI number. I'm not VAT registered, so I can't claim these fees back at the end of the year. So if the fees are actually applied to the import, unfortunately, the client has to cover them. Now, Parcel Force suggested that I might apply for a relief scheme on this kind of import duty, but that application could take up to a month to process, and we didn't have time to do that because by that time we would have run out the window in which the parcel would go back home if it wasn't released from customs. And that scheme, the administration of that relief scheme, was a massive headache. I had to account for all items to HMRC that came into my possession and all the stuff that went back again, so I had to maintain a stock system. So the customer just said, look, let's just do this one as a domestic import, I'll pay whatever fees are due. And after all that, the fee was £19 something pence, which I would imagine barely covered the cost of the correspondence. So the customer had already put in a UAV, which he'd wired up very competently, but one of the reasons I've actually dismantled it and took it off is because when I was cleaning up the board and doing some other work on it, particularly when I was removing the RF modulator here, because we're going to have VBXE in the board as well, and that's going to come out on this DIN 13 connector, and that's going to go up in the top left corner up here. So I've already drilled the holes for the connector, and of course I've removed the RF modulator. So we've got the holes drilled down here, which you should be able to see reasonably well on this 4K footage. I've had to break a couple of traces there, of course, so I'll have to patch over the top of them with some wire when we're done. The video connector all wired up, because they are pretty crucial power traces actually. But that's no problem. That was unavoidable because that's where the footprint of the connector ends up, I'm afraid. So I've done that. I've made up a load of DuPont connectors on the ends of wiring looms like this. This saves a lot of time. So really it means when I actually come to installing stuff, it's basically just a wiring job. I need to adjust the length of these ribbon cables once I find out exactly how long they need to be. That's a bit sticky for some reason. Ugh. So yeah, we've got VBXE, we've got Ultimate 1MB. I took a vertical inductor off the board because it got in the way of Ultimate 1MB. It's not needed anyway. We'll have to reorganize these jumpers. We'll have to convert this to a single OS ROM machine essentially. But anyway, the reason that taking out all the wiring for the UAV is that when I was removing the RF modulator, one of the wire, the chroma wire, broke off basically. It just snapped. And I actually prefer these DuPont headers to the terminal block. So just to keep everything consistent, I'm doing that install basically from scratch again. We also have Pokémax. I think this is a 2B, so that's going to go down here. So we've got stereo audio. I don't know what core's on this board. This is MO4 quad Covox. Yeah, so this is going to have to be flashed so that we get the GTIA audio, the key click on there. We also have SIDE3 cartridge and a 16GB micro SD card. This, of course, is JED 2.3.
fuck's sake.
Which is the one that caused me so many problems in a previous video. The owners made a reasonable job of filing down the sides of the cartridge shell so that it'll fit in the computer. We can probably tidy that up a little bit, but that's not a bad job. I've seen a lot worse than that. Hopefully we'll be able to get this to work with this system, even if I have to do a JED downgrade or an upgrade on, because we've got JED 2.4, which is kind of in the pre-release stages. I did have some problems with it that seemed to irk Candle tremendously, but I can't really understand why, when you're testing something and you're having a problem, it's anything less than valuable feedback. I mean, if it doesn't work everywhere, it doesn't work at all, in my opinion. But there's all sorts of reasons you can have problems with things that may not be repeatable later on. It just goes to show that there's absolutely no substitute for absolutely relentless testing. It's very tedious, but it has to be done. It's very, very hard to know that when you have a stability issue, for example, when you're testing new firmware, it could be something as silly as poor contact on the cartridge contacts here. That very often happens with the XE machines. It could be some other upgrade in the machine, of course. So there's just no substitute for it. It's no good getting downhearted or impatient when you think something should work and you send a JED file to a tester and they say, oh well, I'm having a problem, and they send you a photo of the thing blowing up. It's just something you have to work through, and if you can't be bothered to do that, then I can't see the point at all. But anyway, I've got this pre-release developmental JED 2.4, which actually seems to be a bit better than the original JED 1.3 that was on the Go-Win SIDE3 cartridges. I know they're not strictly called JED files, but I'm calling them JED files because everybody knows what they are. It's the code that goes onto the CPLD. It's not the firmware that goes on the ROM like the loader and Sparta-DOS X. It's the firmware that makes the hardware behave in a certain way. It sets the whole timing characteristics and everything, the registers, the whole lot. Absolutely the most fundamental thing about the device. So I've got JED 2.4 here. It seems to work pretty well. It's not entirely bulletproof, but I don't know if we're ever going to get a SIDE3 that's completely bulletproof, because it's never been completely bulletproof on all machines. We'll have to see what happens with the new SIDE 3.3 revision that Candle has put up on PCBWay. That has reverted back to the lattice CPLD, I'm delighted to see, and anybody who orders one of them, I guess they'll be able to flash whatever JED they want on it. Won't be the Go-Win one, of course, it'll be for the lattice chip. Or maybe they'll come pre-supplied with the lattice JED flash to it. I don't know. I really don't know. But anyway, I'm hopeful that we'll be able to get this SIDE3 to work with the customer's 1200XL. So that's pretty much it in terms of upgrades for this machine. So let's press on and get the stuff installed. Now, in terms of signaling, one of the first things we need to do with the 1200XL is configure it as a single OS-ROM chip XL XE compatible machine. Now, as it ships, the 1200XL has two OS-ROM chips, high and low, so we need to change that. Now, Bob Woolley, absolute veteran of this kind of modification, and he wrote up this very useful guide, and it's actually intended for people who want to add a PBI to the back of the machine. Now, I did that. You can see a previous video, a couple of previous videos in fact, on the computer that I actually sold, the 1200XL I sold recently. That's one that about 13 years or so ago I fitted a PBI connector onto the back of, following this guide. Now, we're not going to put a PBI connector on the back of this machine, but we are going to do about half of the modification, the prelude to that modification. Pretty much the main reason for doing all this is to prep the machine for an XL XE standard MMU. The other thing we're going to do in accordance with this guide, which is essential for PBI devices, but also for a VBXE in a 1200XL, is the creation of an external select signal. Luckily on this particular machine we don't need to change the sockets because it's already got 28-pin sockets under those shorter OS-ROM chips, so I've just popped those off. We need to rearrange some of the jumpers on the board. We need to add an extra address line. So here, all of the 1200XL main boards have 28-pin sites for the OS-ROMs. Well, this one happens to have 28-pin sockets in those sites, so don't have to change the sockets, which is great. And we need another address line, A13. So we remove a jumper, we solder a little wire from the CPU to the top pad of W6. Then we've got our address line, we've got the 16K ROM select. Swap the MMU. Well, we're not going to put an XE MMU in this, but we're going to actually plug Ultimate 1MB into it. And if we go down a little bit further, he talks about basic. We're not interested in basic because that's on the Ultimate 1MB. Right, so here we go, the external select line. So he piggybacks an HC08 on top of the 74LS08 chip. That's exactly the same modification you can see on the video about the 1200XL that I sold. And once we've done that, we're good to go with Ultimate 1MB and VBXE. If you just install an Ultimate 1MB, you don't have to worry about the external select signal. So as far as the jumper configuration is concerned, I think I'll follow suit with what I did with the machine I sold. Actually, I only had a jumper on W11, and that enabled me to plug the Ultimate 1MB into either socket. So we'll give that a try. So I'll take all these jumpers off to be able to test the machine before I put the VBXE in. It would probably be a good idea to wire up the UAV again. Right, so you can see I've desoldered all those jumpers there, and I've taken W6 off because that's going to provide us with E13, address line 13. And I'll probably just fit, as I say, as per the previous machine I sold, which worked perfectly, I'll just put the W11 on and probably leave the rest off. So there's our jumper wire, which actually provides E13 on that rear jumper pad from the CPU. So here's all the connection points for the Ultimate 1MB signals. I should really have a web page with all the connection points illustrated, but maybe I'll get round to that one of these days. So we've done that. I've also, well, I've glued the DIN13 connector in place. I haven't wired that up yet, but you can see I've patched these two big traces that I had to cut to get the DIN13 connector in, and I've added some strain relief on the back there, which happily enough is right next to a little via which is attached to ground. So the shield on the connector is already grounded. There's the two screws holding the standoffs for the Ultimate 1MB. There's the chroma wire. Oh yes, I've wired up the UAV as well, rewired up the UAV, so that's the chroma wire going to the video jack, because we won't know if the thing works or not if we can't see a picture. I've had to make a completely new OS-ROM cable for the Ultimate 1MB because the original one is just nowhere near long enough, owing to the fact that we obviously have to keep the orientation of pin 1 correct all the way around the board. You have to sometimes go around in a bit of a circuitous manner. So anyway, so I actually salvaged the connectors off this cable. I know you shouldn't, but these things are sufficiently difficult to obtain. I wouldn't say they're costly, but they're sufficiently difficult to obtain without ordering from overseas anyway, or from Mauser or somewhere, that I like to salvage them when I've got to replace the cable. The MMU cable I just shortened, so I didn't have to take the hearting connector off, but I did take the IDC connector off. So, if we plug that in here, and I've pre-folded this cable, so it's going to go underneath like that, and careful not to nip any of the wires up. So it goes under there, and actually I think we tuck these wires in here, make things a little bit neater, if it's going to cooperate, and then we can fold that round there, pop that in there. So now with the OS-ROM cable, we're going to put that in the front socket, just because it's less of a tight squeeze if it's in the front socket, because otherwise this cable, you'll either have to send it out the front or it's going to crash up against the cartridge connector there. So this has to go all the way around here. It's the only way I can figure out how to make it go around so that pin 1's in the correct place. If you try and send it up here, it's back to front, so it doesn't work. So yeah, maybe there's a better way to do that, but I don't know. Anyway, so that's everything plugged in. Obviously we've still got the VBXE to do and the Pokémax to put in, and I need to wire up this DIN13 connector, of course, which is an awful job, especially since my eyesight's got significantly worse over the past year or so. But fortunately I've got me magnifier. But we'll do that. What I want to do first, obviously, is make sure the thing still works. I did test it when I first got hold of it before I did any modifications, and it booted up fine. But this is as far as I want to go, just installing the Ultimate board, because if I start to install VBXE and Pokémax and the thing doesn't boot up, obviously you're going to be in a position where you think, well, which upgrade is responsible for the problem? So at least now if this doesn't work, I'm going to have a good idea that it's probably something to do with the Ultimate installation. Maybe sometimes when I make these ribbon cables, they just don't come out quite right. It's very rare now, but normally I can knock them up. I knock these ones up in about 5 minutes. But yeah, I wondered if there's a problem, I want to know about it right now. Okay, switching on. Oh, got it. Oh, excellent. It works. It's got my firmware on it already as well. Right, so it works, so we can safely proceed with the rest of the build. If there's a problem, I want to know about it right now. Well, I knew things were going a little bit too well here. I'm just at the point of preparing the board for the VBXE here. We've already got the 5-way connector there. I've soldered the DIN 13 connector up here. So there's the DIN 13 connector for the RGB video out. I've trusted myself that I've got the pin out correct, so I've heat shrunk all the wires there, because otherwise they'll get damaged while the board's lying on the desk. So hopefully that's all correct. Now the customer has provided an XL version VBXE. Now I think it's been quite a while since I installed a VBXE in a 1200 XL, and I think the last time I did, it was probably an XE version VBXE. And there was a reason for that, and it slipped my mind this time, and I should have pointed it out to the client. Now originally when Candle produced the VBXE boards, again you had 2 versions, one for the XL and one for the XE, but both of them would fit a 1200 XL, and I know that for a fact because I initially, in my 1200 XL, the one I recently sold, I put an XL VBXE in, so that obviously that throws the board backwards from the socket to clear the keyboard on a 600 and 800 XL. Now the reason I changed over on that machine to an XE version was because I put a PAL GTIA adapter board in, and that created clearance problems in terms of height with the XL board, the old design XL board. Now of course in this machine we're not going to convert it to PAL. Now what appears to have happened is Lotharek redesigned both the XL and XE adapters for some reason, presumably cost related or production complexity. Right, so I don't know if you can see this, but this particular flavour of XL adapter, as you can see, it overhangs the GTIA chip behind the Antix socket by a considerable amount. Now I don't know why that is. I'm assuming it's to throw the board further back. Well, that would be the ostensible argument for doing it this way. Throw the board further back, but in so doing of course you make the thing totally incompatible with the 1200 XL. Now you might say, well, you could put a stack of sockets under it. Well, it's already got the provided Antix socket attached to the board, so how many sockets do I need to put underneath this thing to actually get it to clear the GTIA chip? I would suspect you're looking at another 2 sockets possibly. I could trim those legs down at the back, maybe you'd get away with 1 socket, but I'm just concerned that you're going to end up with clearance issues once the Antix chip goes in with the keyboard on the 1200 XL. If that board had been shallower, there would have been no problem at all, because it would have cleared the GTIA chip completely, and with the board being raised up, that would have just gone over the top of the chip. So I should have recommended an XE version of the VBXE, but I did check an older XL board as well to see if this was a recent change. It's not that much of a recent change actually. What he also did is he changed some time ago, he changed the gender of the adapter. This is an older XE adapter with male pin headers on it, but a few years back he changed it so that they're female headers. I think the reason for this is that it means that the board itself, which in the XL flavour has male pins on it and they're hard soldered into the adapter, that means that that board will also work in this adapter, you see. So it cuts down on complexity. So in any case, I'm sort of kicking myself for not recommending the XE version, but when I came to actually put it in, test fit it in the socket, and I will be replacing this this antic socket, by the way, in the board. This is just a test fit. This doesn't actually fit either because this is too long as well. There's a 2mm gap behind the socket, between the socket and the receptacle there, but it just makes it impossible to fit this board here, again, without putting more sockets under it. I think you can make it fit by, because you can see we've got a bit of an overhang here. I think I've done this before, if I file that down, because there's nothing really on that part of the board that's critical, hopefully. If I file that down, it should actually just squeeze in front of the GTI chip. These kinds of improvements, you know, to cut costs and to simplify production. Look at the side effects we've got here. These things, either the XE or the XL version of VBXE is to fit in the 1200 XL, no problem at all. So what are the options here? Well, I've got a spare XE version VBXE here. A more recent one, as you can see, it's got the male headers, so that implies it goes in this adapter. But I was saving this one for one of my 1200 XLs, which I keep saying I'm going to get round to upgrading. I want to use it as an NTSC test machine. So if I swap this board for the customer's board, I'm going to be left with this, and this isn't going to fit in my 1200 XL. So I prefer not to do that. The nuclear option is to either hot air this entire adapter off the board, clear these holes and fit whichever adapter I want to fit, or use the desoldering gun on this set of pins here, detach the XL adapter and try and clean up these pins such that they'll fit in one of these. And it's going to be difficult because there's going to be a lot of residual solder on these pins here. But it might be preferable to trying to take the whole... I have done this before, actually. I have replaced the whole header. So it's definitely doable, but the desoldering gun is going to have a lot of problems with this here, because this is going to create an airtight seal on the other side of the board. So it's going to be very hard to pull the solder out of these holes here with the desoldering gun. I really don't want to put a stack of sockets under here. I think it's a bodge. I don't want to do it. I want to do it properly. And as I say, I think if I just shave a little bit off the back of one of these XE adapters, it'll just fit. But honestly, there needs to be a note on the product page about this. I've brought this up before. I've encountered some problem in the past, and it required a lot of extra work. But again, we've seen this earlier this year, just making changes and not thinking about the side effects of the changes and what it breaks, etc, etc. But anyway, I'll figure it out. I've told the owner about it, and he's confident that I'll find a solution. Right, well, I took the nuclear option here, and at first I tried to just desolder the adapter at that end of the legs there, but I couldn't get that to come off, and so I just hot aired the whole thing off from the top side. Of course, this came off then and left all the legs in the VBXE along with the plastic strips. So we've got bits of plastic all over the place. So I had to completely destroy the header, and I think I've managed to do it without damaging the board at all. So fingers crossed. I can't see any trace damage or anything. No vias are damaged. Cleaned it all up. So basically now I'm free to put this header strip. Notice how much more gold the gold plate is on these ones, by the way. I went out of my way to get nice ones. If they look dull like this, they've got some gold in them, but not much. But anyway, now I can put this on the bottom of there and make it compatible with that. So we can put the board in so that it faces forward. Right, as you can see, I've actually, not only did I take off the whole 40 pin header. I've taken off all the other headers that I'd already put on the board and I've put them underneath. Now I'll flash it up on the screen. I found a picture on the forum, the Atari Age forum from 2016, which I'd put together with little labels of where to get the different signals for the VBXE and the 1200XL, and it was exactly one of these boards, but it was the XE configuration, which is what I've ended up with here. So I should have realised, really it's the passage of time that's to blame here. That might be the last time I'd installed one of these things in a 1200XL, I don't know. But I should have really directed the customer to buy the XE version. But having said that, it's actually 6 of one and half a dozen of the other, because you can fit the XL adapter, the modern XL adapter, in a 1200XL, but I would say you need 2 stacked sockets under the antic adapter. Even if you trim the legs down at the back so that they don't hit the GTIE, you're not going to get away with 1 stacked socket. You need 2. So last night I test fitted this board, which is mine, in this machine, and so it's already got, obviously it's got that socket on the bottom. It needed another one, and these pins are reasonably well trimmed down, but it needed another one to clear the GTIE chip. And then when you put the computer together, the screws on the keyboard, the bottom of the keyboard, hit here. So you would obviously have to put some tape over the top to insulate these contacts, but that's a definite problem, and it does actually hit the keyboard. So in both cases now, the keyboard hits the VBXE. In this case it hits the crystals, and in the case of one of these on 2 stacked sockets, it hits the, well, it'll hit these, for example, it'll hit these headers straight away. So you'd probably have to mount them underneath maybe to get this to fit. With the old design, the black PCBs, having to mount these connectors underneath, as you can see from the picture that I found on the forum, I didn't previously mount these ones, but I thought, what the hell, we'll put them on the bottom, it's consistent anyway. But I did, even with the black boards, I had to put the front connectors on the bottom because the keyboard comes up here. So that's always been a step that you've had to do, fair enough, if you chose to put the XE board in the 1200XL. But with the old XL version, the black PCB, there was no clearance issue with this here, and you could just happily put an XL VBXE in a 1200XL, providing you didn't have anything tall in the GTIE socket, like a PAL adapter for instance, which would mandate that you use the XE version. There's quite a lot to consider when you choose which one to get. I can only recommend the XE VBXE for the 1200XLs at this point, because I don't like stacked sockets. I never liked them. I didn't like the stacked sockets on the Rapidus and the XE machine, which was quite a lot of stacked sockets, but they're just a point of failure. And what I'm actually inclined to do as well, because these VBXE antic adapters are they're a source of problems as well. Now I've got this is the XE adapter, of course, that I've been able to put in here now. Correction to what I said earlier about that little lip on the back of the PCB. I did file it off, but it's not really necessary because it would just fit if I tip the board up. You can see I've filed that down, but it would just hit the legs of the GTIE chip if you didn't file it down, the actual edge of the PCB. Not ideal, but it would just squeeze in, I think. Just to be on the safe side, I've filed that lip on the back edge of this PCB, and there's no problem now. So yeah, I think going forward I'll do what I used to do and I forgot to do this time, is to just recommend the XE version of the VBXE for the 1200XL. It's not perfect, there's still clearance issues, but the case will shut if these headers are put on the bottom. These ones here, I mean, you don't even need this one, that's the AVR header. I just put that on for completeness. It's not, I don't think it's on the board when you buy it, so you can just leave it off. And these two at the back, you could probably put them on the top anyway. You can leave them on the top because they're not really going to cause a problem with the keyboard with this arrangement. But as I say, I took them all off anyway, and I've put them all on the bottom, and it looks unique, it looks okay. So we're guaranteed not to have any problems. But yeah, so there it is, and moving a little bit further back on the board here, you can see I've also done the external select modification. Now, Bob's instructions for the external select, we've got a wire coming from the right hand side of the board. You cut a trace, run a wire, so we've got a wire here. You need to cut a trace coming from pin 16 of the MMU, which goes to here. The trace gets cut underneath, the wire goes from here, and it goes to pin 3 of the stacked, the piggybacked 74 F08 in this case. And Bob doesn't say, but there's actually a pad you've got, because you've got a wire pickup CAS inhibit from the MMU pin 16. Well, there's actually a via right behind the pin on the board, so I've used the via there, which I think I've always done. I just couldn't remember where it was. And of course that's the pull-up resistor. I couldn't find a 2.7k, so I found a 3k, so hopefully that'll be fine, I'm sure it will. So that's the external select circuit, so that's why I've got all these ribbon cables unplugged here, because I've been doing that. So here we've got the RGB cable for the VBXE, which I can plug back in actually. So all of the signals for VBXE are in place now. So we've got the clock output, 3.5 megahertz clock output on pin 1 here, that's ground connection. We've got IRQ on pin 1 of this one here. I think that's external select on pin 2, CAS inhibit on pin 3. So VBXE should be up and running. So what I need to do next anyway, before we actually test the VBXE output, is hook up a composite sync to the VBXE jack, plug everything back in, and of course we've still got to wire up Pokémax, but I've stuck Pokémax in the board and I've already flashed it. It came with a quad Poké Covox, whatever it is, core. Well, you lose the key click with the Pokémax 2 with that core, so I've flashed it to a stereo and Covox, dual Poké and Covox, which will allow us to get the key click out of the stereo mix, which I think is far preferable. And I think once we've got that part done, we'll basically be finished. I'll go ahead, make these extra connections, come back and show you the finished product. Right, I think we are done here. I've got Pokémax wired up, VBXE output works, which I'm absolutely delighted about given all the work that was done on the VBXE board. I remembered I had to take the Ultimate off to do the 5 volt modification on the SIO port. The resistor R63 is right underneath the board there, so that had to come off. And I eventually found the trace for GTIE Bell, which is, I'll show you. So the GTIE Bell input for the Pokémax is on that bottom of that resistor right there. That's a little mental note for me as much as anybody else, just to remember, because I hunted around for that for a while. A4 and A7 I just took off the cartridge port. I couldn't find any vias for that. Now, as soon as I switch this on to test it with a keyboard attached, which I'll show you in a minute, I noticed a problem, and it's a known problem with 1200 XLs and Ultimate 1MB sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes, is that I couldn't always get into the setup menu with help and reset. Sometimes the system would just lock up, other times I got a menu full of garbage. And that is because of reset pulses, or the residual reset pulses when you hit the system reset key. So what that actually does is it causes the Ultimate 1MB to internally reset itself a second or third time after the system resets occurred. So these little residual reset pulses are picked up by the Ultimate 1MB, and basically what you end up with is the I/O RAM underneath the I/O region, which the Ultimate 1MB uses. That turns itself off and everything gets out of sync. So the fix for that, which I think Matthias Reichel first suggested, and it's documented on the Atari Age forum, is a little capacitor between the reset line and ground. I used to put that on the Ultimate board itself, but it doesn't do any harm on the 1200 XL. I think Bob Woolley's written a post about it, a post or two on the forum. He might have even had a different solution, but he regards it as a kind of a design flaw in the 1200 XL per se, regardless of the Ultimate 1MB. So what I've done here, I've just put the cap, it's a 100 nanofarad cap across the CPU. So that's going from pin 1 ground to pin 40 reset, and I've observed that has actually done the trick. I've put the filter caps on the audio lines as well. I nearly forgot to do that. I don't actually know if it makes any difference across SCART, but they're specified on the Pokémax installation manual, so they're in. I'm just putting the board on this little bit of plastic here, just to avoid squashing the wiring on the DIN 13 connector. Yeah, so that's everything wired up. And as far as I can tell, everything seems to work. So what I'm going to do now, we've got SIDE3 to introduce to the system yet. And this is, SIDE 3.2 JED 210224, the dreaded JED 2.3. So I think this is probably going to need a downgrade or an upgrade of some sort. So anyway, we'll get to that presently. I did see something worrying as well. I had the same problem with a prior 1200XL, and there's some variation in these Ultimate 1MB boards, as I've mentioned before. They've changed the RAM on them. It's Alliance RAM. It was Renesas before. I don't know if that's got anything to do with it, but changing, in the case of the 1200XL I sold recently, swapping the old Renesas RAM Ultimate 1MB for a new one with Alliance SRAM fixed the problem of, in that case, it was actually PBI devices not working properly. And of course, in this case, we've got the customer supplied Ultimate board. It's got the Alliance SRAM on it. Not much I can do about that. I'm not going to start changing the RAM. But I did notice the odd birdie on the screen. They're little white flecks just going across the screen. I'm going to keep my eyes open for them. I haven't seen them since I put the reset cap on the CPU, although the two problems should be entirely unrelated. But I want to install the PokeMax and VBXE firmware and SIDE3 firmware on the Ultimate 1MB, and we'll just keep our eyes open for any problems. I'm not going to put that side piece on the case yet either, because it just makes putting the SIDE3 cartridge, whether it's cased or not, it just makes it more difficult to locate the thing. So we'll just put the keyboard on for the moment. And it does just shut the case, just barely. I haven't noticed any problems with the keyboard yet. Whether or not there are any problems with the keyboard, I don't know. Hopefully not. So there we are. So there's our 1200XL, and it's gonna, it'll close up, but by God, it's tight. Got some power, and we'll run off the VBXE output. Why not? And I will at some point flash the VBXE NTSC palette core to the VBXE, so we don't have to soft load the NTSC palette. Obviously, NTSC users will appreciate having the correct color palette on the RGB output. So we'll turn it on. Profile 1 reset. Right, so let's have a look what we've got. We have firmware 4.20. We've got the SIDE2 plugin. So yeah, this is the the default FJC firmware. Keyboard seems fine so far. So it's picked up the factor stereo on the machine. Hopefully we don't keep getting profile resets all the time. So there's our VBXE output. It's got the correct aspect ratio for NTSC, but obviously the wrong colours at the moment, which we'll fix presently. I'm going to need SIO to PC. We'll do a plug-in flash. In fact, we'll do a full BIOS flash, because I've just produced a little bit of a fix. Somebody noticed a problem whereby the basic state on the incognito and Colleen mode wouldn't stick. It kept turning itself off, internal basic. So I fixed that problem, but it was sort of vaguely related to a little bug that had gone unnoticed for a long time concerning unhandled keys in the firmware, so I fixed that. So what I'll do is I'll flash that version of the BIOS to the customer's Ultimate 1MB. So he just got the latest stuff and the correct plugin, because he does want to use this system with SIDE3. So we'll do main BIOS flash. I've compiled one with the appropriate plugin on it. No screen corruption yet, that's good. I don't want to see any more. File too large, what's wrong with that? Yeah, forgot to turn off NTSC palette when I, the soft palette when I compiled the BIOS. Overflowed the plugin space. This should work. There we go. Right, so now if we go into the BIOS, and it did so without any reset problems, and I can't see any corruption or birdies on the screen yet. Oh, time's still correct. We can turn this on now. That's correct. Right, so here's the PokeMax setup. We can select dual Poke, Covox enabled, and all this other stuff we can do. So that pertains to the PokeMax, so we'll save that. We'll double check that those settings persisted. And they did, good, that's all working well. So here's it, right, so here we've got BIOS version 4.23. We've got the VBXE plugin, the SIDE3 plugin, the PokeMax 2 plugin. That all looks fine. PokeMax core is correct, I flashed that earlier on. So no signs of problems so far. So let's introduce some problems by putting this in the machine. Oh, let's see if we can get into the loader. And we can. Excellent, excellent, excellent. That's looking good so far. Oh, there we go. Right, so we got exactly the same problem we had, which I demonstrated in the video I made back in, well, I released back in July, whereby we've got all sorts of corruption. So this is fairly typical of what I'm seeing when I buy a retail or get hold of a retail SIDE 3.2 with JED 2.3 in it. Absolutely typical. There was obviously some machine that was used for testing over in Poland where this sort of thing didn't happen, presumably. But yeah, I mean, look at this, just absolutely, completely messed up. Terrible, terrible. So that's going to need, this cartridge is going to need the JED changed. I'll try it with JED 1.3 for GoWin, because this is a GoWin CPLD cartridge. And I'll try it with JED 2.4, which is the tentative update for GoWin SIDE 3s. If JED 2.4 works out well, that's another indication that that's probably the way forward. So we'll go ahead and do that, and we'll see if we can't get this SIDE 3 to work. I don't know, I'll try and run some software nevertheless, just to test that. Oh, look at the state of this. Oh my god, can we run UMP? Yeah, UMP's running. Well, just to check that the stereo works. Okay. There we go, stereo detected, very nice, sounds good. So let's see if we can't fix SIDE 3. Now, speaking of SIDE 3, just a heads up for anyone still thinking of purchasing one. Although Lotharek initially broke all the toys and discontinued SIDE 3 entirely in July, he later started selling SIDE 3.2 again, but with JED 1.3, which is the original JED for the GoWin FPGA that shipped on SIDE 3.2 before Lotharek decided the JED needed some improvements back in February. That's available at his store until stock out, at which point he'll supposedly discontinue the product entirely. However, it was unclear for a while what version of SIDE 3 Retro Lemon in the UK was selling, largely because Retro Lemon listings, both on the main site and on eBay, have specified a Lattice FPGA more or less since sales commenced, and this didn't change when the Lattice SIDE 3 stock ran out and the GoWin stock went on sale. And yes, before anybody asks, I did raise this with Jakob in private already when I was about to order a replacement SIDE 3 for the customer whose cartridge I featured in the SIDE 3 video I released in July. Since I had a point to prove there, I asked Jakob what I would actually receive, and he assured me that since all his Lattice FPGA SIDE 3 stock had run out, I would receive SIDE 3.2 with a GoWin FPGA and JED 2.3. And sure enough, as I showed in the video, that replacement SIDE 3 was identical to the customer's cartridge and behaved, i.e. failed, in exactly the same way. Now, although I remarked at the time that the product photograph showed a Lattice FPGA equipped SIDE 3.1 and that the description specified a Lattice FPGA, the description wasn't corrected until only a few weeks ago, and even then, lattice FPGA was simply removed from the description. Since the photos still show SIDE 3.1 with a lattice FPGA, however, and the description doesn't specifically state that what's on sale is a SIDE 3.2 with a Go-Win FPGA with JED 2.3, I feel it's important to point out that what you'll receive from RetroLemon is the version Lotharek withdrew before downgrading his remaining stock to JED 1.3 and then putting it back on sale. Of course, it's perfectly reasonable that Jakob's selling SIDE 3.2 with JED 2.3, since that's what he purchased from Lotharek before the problems with JED 2.3 came to light, and it's obvious that not only does Jakob not have the equipment to downgrade the JED after the fact, but that he probably doesn't see anything wrong with it and is happy to sell whatever he received in the condition he received it. But I do think it's important to point out that what's being sold isn't what's in the photos. Jakob's always very responsive, and I'm sure he'll provide any further information you need if you drop him an email. If you want what I consider to be the far more reliable and predictable lattice FPGA SIDE 3, the only place to purchase one is currently from PCBWay, where Candle is selling SIDE 3.3. However, PCBWay has a minimum order quantity, the product isn't currently sold with a case, and it's unclear what firmware, if any, the boards ship with. Okay, let's get this VBXE palette installed, the NTSC palette. Yes, it's a little bit unclear exactly what I'm looking for here. V2. Aha, so it's a R2. Long file names would be really useful here. I think it's that one. Right, so that went well. So if we press escape, what I want to do now is set that to the boot block, which I'll press B. Right, so boot bank is B6. So hopefully, if I now restart the computer, we should get a nice NTSC palette, which we do. It's not particularly noticeable on camera, but it does look different to the naked eye. So what I've also done here, after installing yet more platform cable programming software on the system, is I have applied JED 2.4 for SIDE 3 Go-Win cartridges, and it does appear to have improved the situation with SIDE 3 quite significantly. I've seen no more of the birdies either since I did that reset modification. That's very interesting. Things are looking pretty good, and obviously I'll test it more. Yeah, he said. It's just crashed.
Oh shit. Here we go again.
So yeah, so maybe that wasn't quite as good as it seemed at first. So out of curiosity, I'm trying my SIDE 3.0 cartridge here to see if things are any better there. Not too bad. Try and run a cartridge. Yeah, cartridge works. So that's SIDE 3.0. I'll turn it off and show you. I took the case off so it'll fit. So that's mine. Well, I think that's it. I think short of exhaustive testing and maybe trying a different JED 1.3 perhaps on the SIDE 3.2 cartridge, we're pretty much done. The thing is with this SIDE 3.2, I'm aware that there's all sorts of factors that can cause things to suddenly go wrong, and that's why the testing process is just time consuming and completely exhaustive, and it's easy to get false negatives as well as false positives when you're testing something out. But as I say, I saw one crash with JED 2.4 on this cartridge, and I tried it again thereafter and it was okay so far. But when I put this one in, this is the SIDE 3.0, the original one, it just doesn't do things like that at all, which is, sure, it seems to me significant. The attitude I take is that this thing, SIDE 3.2, it's unpredictable, and that makes it difficult because what you're looking for is days and days of problem-free operation. and you just don't see it. So it becomes a messy process trying to feed back test data 4 years into the hardware, and it's still a bit of a nightmare. Maybe I'll give this machine a little bit of a topical cleaning. I think what's happened with the console keys, unfortunately, is that this often happens, that there's protective film on the tops of the console keys here on these 1200 XLs. And I think it's been left on for like 40 years, which you might think, oh, well, that's going to protect the aluminium. How nice. But of course, somebody's had to go at taking it off here, and it's welded itself to the anodized aluminium, and it won't come off. I've seen this before. So as far as I can tell, all of these keys, you can see the remnants of it between the keys. They've all got the protective film on, and it ain't coming off. It would have probably been better to just leave it alone, because it starts to go a bit yellow. It looks a bit manky, as we say in the northeast of England. The case could probably do with a bit of a retro bright. It looks yellower in person than it does on the camera, but I'm not going to get into that. That's not what I was asked to do here. But yeah, that's the machine pretty much done. I'm fairly pleased with how it's turned out, and I'm hoping not to see, with SIDE3 out of the picture, SIDE 3.2 out of the picture, I'm hoping not to see any glitches or anything at all. Other than that one crash with the SIDE3 cartridge, it's behaved very, very well for as long as I've been filming it, actually. So that's encouraging. So yes, so I hope you found that one interesting. As always, I want to thank the video sponsor, and I want to thank in particular the patrons. I'm getting a few more patrons month on month, which is very encouraging indeed. I'm trying to increase the output a little bit, make it a little bit more regular, at least get 2 videos out a month if I possibly can, for as long as I've got material to make videos about. There's a few back burner projects, a couple more decent XL keyboards I've got to make up. I've got a couple of ideas, sort of review things for devices that aren't necessarily brand new, but about which I haven't really had anything to say so far, because I've had a few nice little donations sent in. One very nice thing, actually, among other things, one kind supporter sent me some nice 3D prints he'd made as a bit of a present, and I think that's very nice indeed. I'll have to put that up on the wall somewhere. And he actually sent me an A8 Pico cart as well, with the logo on it, which I thought was very, very kind of him indeed. Lots of fun, lots of fun. So yeah, thanks very much for your support to everybody who's watching the videos, liking the videos, and leaving comments. And I know I've featured a lot of 1200 XL stuff on the channel quite recently, but I thought this one had a little bit of a different twist, because I ran into a serious issue trying to get the VBXE into the machine. But anyway, thanks very much for watching. Thank you for your support, and I will see you soon in the next video, so bye bye for now.